and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of the Hyper Conscious Podcast. We have a very special guest today. He writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. He is a behavior design expert, and he is the author of the best-selling book, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and a book that I'm reading right now and absolutely loving that we're going to talk a lot about today, Indistractable. We are sitting down with the one and only Nir Eyal. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you jumping on all the way from Singapore to talk to us today. It is 7:30 here. Where is it? What time is it where you are?
12 hours later, so 7:30 p.m.
7:30 p.m. All right.
Yeah,
all right. So
literally the other side of the world.
Yeah. Yes. So number one, the first thing that I want to jump into is, what do you do today? Who is Nir today? And then we'll take a step back to figure out how the hell did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm what you call a behavioral designer. So I help companies design products and services that are more engaging, that help people form healthy habits in their lives. So my first book, which came out of a class that I taught for many years at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, was called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And the idea behind that book was that we can use the same psychology that keeps us hooked to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat. We can use that same psychology to help people form good habits in their lives. And that's exactly what's happened. So since the book was published about 6 years ago, companies like Kahoot, the world's largest educational software, get kids hooked onto in-classroom learning. Fitbod gets people hooked to exercise. I've worked with companies like the New York Times to get people hooked to using the New York Times app. So all kinds of companies in every industry imaginable can use these techniques. It shouldn't just be, the social media companies and the gaming companies that use these techniques. Any company that's trying to make a product that they want people to use because they want to, not because they feel like they have to, that's my specialty. That's what I work on, is really helping people build healthy habits in their lives through the various products and services we use. And so the flip side of that, if Hooked is about building good habits, my second book, Indistractable, is about how do we break the bad habits. Because, as someone who's studied behavioral design and habit formations for over a decade now, I understand the Achilles heel of why we get distracted. And so now I can write about how we break these bad habits while still using the same techniques for good to help us form good habits.
What was your catalyst for writing Indistractable, in terms of, did something personally happen to you where you found yourself being distracted more than you should, and you figured, okay, if this is happening to me and I know so much about this, it must be happening to other people? How did that process actually happen?
Absolutely. So for me, the turning point was when I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this beautiful day planned, and we had this book, this activity book that daddies and daughters could do together. And one of the questions in the book was to ask each other this question, that if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember the question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, I decided it was a good time to just check my phone for one quick second. And by the time I looked up from my phone, I realized that I'd blown it, that she was gone. She left the room because she got the hint that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And I blew this perfect daddy-daughter moment. And so that's when I realized I had to reassess my relationship with distraction. And if I am honest with you, it wasn't just with my daughter that I would get distracted. It was, I would say I would exercise and I didn't. I would say I would eat right and I wouldn't. I would sit down at my desk to work and somehow I do everything but the thing I sat down to actually get done. And so that's when I figured, if I could have any superpower, I would want the superpower to be indistractable. How amazing could life be if we simply did what we said we were going to do, right? Exercise when we said we would, be fully present with our friends and family when we say we will be, do the work we say we're going to do. How amazing would your life be? I mean, you could have everything you wanted if you just did what you said, because, the problem these days is no longer this excuse of the information gap. It used to be maybe, in our parents' or our grandparents' generation, you could say, well, I just don't know what to do, right? I don't know how to lose weight. Today, come on, who doesn't know? Seriously? Right. You have to eat right and exercise. There's no magic formula. You don't have to go buy some book to tell you that. We all know it. And if you don't know it, Google it, right? We all know how to do our jobs better. You got to do the work, especially the hard stuff. right? We don't need books to tell us that. We just got to do it. And so the problem is no longer an information gap. Everything's at our fingertips. We can just Google pretty much any problem we have. We're going to find the answer to it. What we lack is an understanding of how to do the things we know we should do. That's the problem. We don't understand how to stop getting distracted. And if you thought the world was distracting before this whole coronavirus crisis that we're going through now, I wrote the book back in September, and it was very timely because people were saying, oh my God, all these gadgets and devices, I'm so distracted all the time. Well, now that's even, that's been taken up to 11 now because we're all even more distracted now that we have this current crisis. People are constantly checking their phones to, figure out what's going on in the world, the latest news, checking Facebook and Instagram every 5 minutes because there's more stress, there's more uncertainty, and that's leading to more distraction.
I just want to frame it as this, just so the listeners will know. In your opinion, what is distraction? Like, what constitutes a distraction?
This is a great question. Okay, so this is the best place to start, is to really understand the terminology. So the best place to begin here is to understand what is distraction. And the best way to understand what is distraction is to understand what is the opposite of distraction. So think to yourself, what's the opposite of distraction? Most people will say it's focus, but I disagree. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. That in fact, if you look at the source, at the origin of both words, traction and distraction, they both come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll also notice that both words end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent, things that help you live out your values and be the kind of person you want to become. So that is traction. Now, the opposite of traction is distraction. Any action you take that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that pulls you away from becoming the kind of person you want to become, anything that pulls you away from living out your values. So now that we understand traction and distraction, there's 2 really important points here around this dichotomy. First, anything can become a distraction. Okay, see if this rings true for you. You sit down at your desk and you say, okay, now I'm going to get to work. I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to work on that hard project. Here I go. I'm going to get started. But first, let me just check email real quick, right? Let me just do that one thing on my to-do list just to get myself going, right? Just to get in the groove. Let me just check off a few of those things on my to-do list. And I would interject here that type of distraction is the most sinister form. It's much worse than playing Candy Crush or checking Facebook or YouTube, because when you do those things, if you're playing Candy Crush at work, you're slacking off, right? It's pretty obvious. You know it. Everybody knows it. But when you check email thinking, oh, this is productive, this is worky kind of stuff that I need to do, instead of working on that important project that you should be doing at that time, you have let distraction trick you, fool you into prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important. And that's the most toxic form of distraction. So it doesn't matter the activity, anything can be a distraction. And conversely, anything can be traction. So I have had it up to here with these Chicken Little tech critics who say, technology is melting your brain, stop using technology, Facebook is bad for you, stop checking YouTube. Meanwhile, these professors who say this crap, they don't even have social media accounts. So don't tell me to stop using technology when my job relies upon using technology. And especially in this day and age, when thank God we have this technology. Can you imagine if we went through this crisis with Corona 30 years ago? Before we could now talk to each other through Zoom, literally halfway across the world. Yeah. Thank God we have these technologies now. Right. So the solution can't be to stop using them. Then that's impractical. And frankly, even if we did, that wouldn't solve the problem. People have been moaning about distraction at least for the past 2,500 years. Plato, 2,500 years before the iPhone, talked about how distracting the world was back then and how people just couldn't stay focused on what they wanted to do 2,500 years ago. People have always been distracted. So it's not about whatever technology is in our hands. And I would posit that anything you plan to do is traction. If you want to watch something on Netflix, if you want to play a video game, if you want to scroll Reddit or Facebook or whatever you want to do, is fine, great, enjoy it. But do it on your schedule, not on some tech company's schedule. That's the difference between traction and distraction. One word: intent. Because you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So the simple act of deciding in advance what it is you want to do, and we'll get into how to do this with some more advanced techniques, the simple act of deciding when you want to do these things is a game changer. We can talk about exactly how to do that.
So Nir, Kevin and I talked a lot in the preamble about basically when someone's uncomfortable and uncertain, you said that that's when they find distractions. So right now in the world, a lot of people are uncertain about the future, uncertain about the present, uncertain about all of our daily routines have gotten uprooted, at least to some extent. Right now, what for our listeners, what do you believe is one way for them to really get control of their daily routine again and kind of adapt to these new circumstances?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me talk about the 4 big steps here that go into becoming indistractable, the 4 strategies, because, I can give you life hacks and tactics and everybody wants those, but tactics are only important if you understand the strategy, right? Tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it.
Exactly. Yep.
So strategy is actually more important. So let's talk about this for a minute. So we've got traction, we've got distraction. What prompts us to take these actions? We have 2 things. There are 2 types of what we call triggers. There are external triggers and there are internal triggers. External triggers are what we tend to blame: the pings, the dings, the rings, all of these things in our outside environment that can lead us towards traction or distraction, right? So that's what everybody tends to blame: my iPhone, my kids, my computer, all these external triggers. But it turns out in my 5 years of research for this book, what I discovered was that the number one cause of distraction is not the external triggers. It's not the stuff people tend to blame. But in fact, it's not what is going on outside of us, but rather what is happening from within. That most distraction is triggered not from the external triggers, but from the internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape from.
Right.
Okay. Loneliness, uncertainty, fatigue, stress, anxiety. These uncomfortable states that we want to escape, that in fact, everything you do, okay, let me drop a little bit of something that shook me up when I learned what the research says about this, that everything you do, you actually only do for one reason. Many people think that motivation is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. This has been kind of the doctrine since the time of Freud. Freud called this the pleasure principle. Everything we do is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Neurologically speaking, we know this is not true. That in fact, neurologically, everything you do for one reason and one reason only.
Avoid pain.
And that is the desire to escape discomfort.
Right.
Everything you do is about the desire to escape discomfort, even the desire to feel good, right? Wanting, craving, desire, lusting. There's a reason we say love hurts. So wanting to feel good is itself psychologically destabling. These things create discomfort that gets us to act. So if everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort, what this means, therefore, is that time management is pain management. Time management is pain management. The reason we procrastinate, the reason we get distracted is not because there's something wrong with you. You're not broken, you're not defective, you're wonderful and normal. There's nothing inherently defective about you. It's just that you don't have the tactics, you don't have the skills to deal with this discomfort in a way that leads you towards traction rather than distraction. So if you add on top of this world where we have access to get distracted, if you're looking for distraction, it's easier than ever to find. It's all here in your pocket, right? If you're looking to get distracted, it's easier than ever. So not only is it easier than ever, now we've amped up the stress level because we're also worried about what's going on in the world, right? So that's added all these internal triggers of fear and worry and uncertainty that makes it very difficult for us to manage those internal triggers. And so we need to use this skill set. It's more important than ever to know how to deal with that discomfort. So that's step number 1, is mastering the internal triggers. That's step 1. Step number 2, I'll just say the 4, and then we can dive into wherever you want to go. Step number 1 is master the internal triggers. If you don't deal with that first, no other technique will work. I don't care what life hacks you've heard, what books you've read, what time management guru you listen to. None of that stuff works if you don't fundamentally know how to master your internal triggers. That's step 1. Step 2 is about making time for traction. Okay, it's back to this idea of planning your day with intent. And we can talk about how to do that, because remember, you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Step number 3 is hacking back the external triggers. So now we dive into the pings, the dings, the rings, our kids, our boss, all these things in our environment that can distract us. How do we hack back those external triggers so that they serve us as opposed to us serving them? And then finally, the last step is to prevent distraction with pacts. And so this is where we're going to use a firewall. We're going to use, as a last resort, when we might get distracted, we're going to make a pact, a pre-commitment device is what psychologists call it, to make sure that when the time comes, we don't succumb to distraction. So that's the 4 steps. Master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with pacts. And now we can go into any one of those categories you'd like.
So good.
Yeah, I know. That was fire. That's like a teaser clip right there. That's 5 teaser clips right there. I had a moment. So this show is called Hyperconscious, and we're always about figuring out why things are the way they are. Why are we doing what we're doing? I remember anytime I was out on a date or with friends and they get up to use the bathroom and I was at the table, immediately I'd start looking at my phone. Like, okay, I need this. What are some examples of a distraction that you might not even know that you're doing consciously because it's such a habit? Like, for me, I never realized I'm uncomfortable, so I'm looking at my phone. I never knew that.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, it was just easy.
It was quote unquote normal, right?
It was, yeah, that's what people do when they're alone at the table, right? You don't want to look around and see people.
And let's psychoanalyze this a bit. What do you think was the uncomfortable sensation? What did you feel that would prompt you to look at your phone? Or what would happen if you didn't look at your phone? How would you feel?
I think probably judgment. Like, look at that kid sitting by himself.
Okay. So judgment. What else? Anything else? Any other emotions, feelings?
Being this, like, feeling like I was the center of attention and not wanting that. Like, I don't.
Self-conscious.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think judgment, self-consciousness.
Yeah.
Anything.
Maybe boredom, right? What am I supposed to do here? Just sitting here? That's boring. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And so those are our internal triggers. Now, if you're comfortable with that behavior, if you don't find that behavior particularly distracting, let's say for that period of time, you're perfectly fine saying, hey, you know what? When I got nothing else planned to be with my friends and my friends aren't here because they went to the bathroom, and you're cool with that, I'm fine with it too. There's nothing inherently wrong with checking the technology, right? It's not the technology's fault.
Right.
It's when we use the technology when we plan to do something else. Okay, then it's a problem. So whether it's too much booze, too much news, too much Facebook, too much football, you name it, anything that we are doing to escape an uncomfortable reality, that's when it's a problem. When we can't deal with our feelings without grabbing this thing or drinking this thing or snorting that thing, that's when it becomes a problem.
So Nir, I, in the past, had a challenge with alcohol, and I often say when we're in emotional pain, which you would say emotional discomfort, we either escape into a vice or develop a virtue. And that decision in those moments of emotional discomfort is what creates the trajectory of our life. Lately, and this is interesting, I was just talking to my girlfriend yesterday morning about this, I've actually been having the booze trigger, which is new for me because for the last 250 some odd days that I've been sober, I haven't really felt much of that. Do you think that's with the uncertainty going on right now? Because all of a sudden I'm thinking about, alcohol randomly.
Yeah. No, that's, I think I love the way you said that. Say that again. You develop a virtue or you develop a vice. It sounds very similar to traction or distraction.
Right.
Because, I would argue, and this is a little bit controversial, so I'm not telling anybody what to do. My area of expertise is not alcohol addiction. But let's talk about tech distraction, for example.
Okay.
That, I think the advice of strict abstinence for a trigger you can't avoid, right? We can't stop using technology. We're not going to throw away our phones. It's the same advice I give when it comes to nutrition for, what we eat. You can't stop eating.
Right.
You have to live with these potential vices and make sure that you can use them in a way that leads you towards virtue, right? Traction rather than distraction. And what we find is that when people impose strict abstinence on themselves, it's almost like a rubber band, okay? That when we pull on a rubber band, we pull, and we tell ourselves, don't do it. And then when we finally give in, that relief of not having to tell yourself, don't do it, feels good. It's almost like, when you really have to pee and you hold it, you're on a road trip and you hold it, you finally make it to the rest stop, and then you let yourself pee. It feels good, right?
Oh, yeah.
That relief of tension feels good. That actually, I believe, having looked at the research, is what makes cigarettes so addictive. We find that cigarettes on their own, nicotine makes you feel something. Clearly, it has a physiological effect, but more so is the psychological effect of telling yourself, don't smoke, don't smoke. Okay, fine, I'll smoke. And that first puff, feels so good.
Interesting.
But when people are conscious of that first puff, when they actually think about what they're experiencing, most smokers actually don't like the sensation. When people are asked to be mindful of smoking, they actually say it's not that great, right? But it's the relief of the tension of telling ourselves not to. So there are better techniques out there, I believe, than telling ourselves strict abstinence. Now, some things we do need strict abstinence. So for of course narcotics, and if you are able to remove the triggers completely from your life, that can be a very effective technique. And so abstinence can work. But what we find is when these triggers are around us all the time, the way technology, the news media, food are, that many times strict abstinence can actually backfire. And so we want other techniques. And so that's what I talk about in the book, these techniques for example, from acceptance and commitment therapy that can be very effective as well.
Powerful.
Nir, where does willpower come into this? Like, can
Yeah.
you will your way from being distracted, or is that why you have systems in place as the firewall, like you said?
So willpower is a very controversial topic right now in the psychology community. That there's a lot of controversy about what willpower really is. And we're starting to come to the conclusion that we've been telling people about willpower too much, that in fact, the whole concept may not be real. What I certainly discovered in my research is that the people who are most focused in their day, the people who do what they say they're going to do, that are the least distractible, they don't particularly have a lot of willpower or self-control. What they have are systems. They have practices in place that prevent them from getting distracted. One of the most pernicious beliefs out there that has to do with willpower is this idea of what we call ego depletion. Now, ego depletion is this idea that got some credibility a few years ago when there was a researcher who claimed that willpower is a limited resource. And he had some studies that showed that when people do a difficult task, that he gave them math problems to do, that they ran out of willpower, that it was a limited resource, kind of like, using up gas in a gas tank. And then once you were out of willpower, you had none left. And as is the case in the social sciences, when a study sounds a little fishy, when it sounds too good to be true, well, then psychologists replicate the study. We run the study again. And it turns out that upon replication, we could not get the same results. That psychologists found that ego depletion, this idea that willpower runs out like gas in a gas tank, doesn't really exist, except in one group of people. There was one group of people who really did exhibit traits of ego depletion. They really did run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And you know who those people were? The people who exhibited ego depletion, the only people, were people who believed that willpower was a limited resource.
Interesting.
That's it.
So Nir,
and so it was their belief that they were limited that made it so. And so this is why I'm trying to fight this battle of telling people not to say that they're addicted to technology, right? Now, some people do have a pathological addiction. About 1 to 5% of the population has comorbidities with obsessive compulsive disorder, with other disorders that may lead to an actual pathology of addiction. But the vast majority of us are not addicted to technology. We're distracted. But when you call it that, you say when you call it a distraction as opposed to an addiction, well, wait a minute, now I got to do something about it. Oh, that's no fun. Who do I blame?
Right. I have to blame me? What? I can't do that.
That's no
that means
fun.
I have to change. So Nir, the idea of decision fatigue, is that what you're talking about with ego depletion? Is there
ego depletion? They're different. They're different
okay.
concepts.
Can you describe decision fatigue, and is it like a muscle that you train? Like when it comes to willpower and all that, can you get some clarity around that for us, please?
Yeah, so decision fatigue has to do with this, what we call the tyranny of choice, that when you have too many choices and you constantly have to make decision after decision after decision, that can be exhausting, that can be mentally fatiguing, which is different from this concept of willpower. You know, the concept of ego depletion, the best example, even if you don't know the term, you know, I used to live by this all the time because I had this self-limiting belief. I would come home from work and I would say, oh, I've had such a tough day. I can't use any more willpower. Give me that pint of Ben and Jerry's. I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix, right? Because I just can't anymore. I've got no more willpower left. I'm going to do whatever I want. And so that would be an example of ego depletion, when you believe that you're spent.
Right.
Nir, how do you, oh, sorry, Alan. We're talking a lot about designing your day, designing your life, avoiding distractions. Alan and I both have systems of success that we do every day, and, you know, making sure we move the needle on the things that matter. How do you decide what to do during the day? Obviously, it's based on the outcomes you want. And do you schedule?
Talked a little bit about step one, about mastering the internal triggers. We can come back to different techniques that you can use that are much more effective than strict abstinence to help you master the internal triggers. Step two is about making time for traction, because again, you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Today, everything is a distraction. There's nothing on your calendar. And so what we have to do is to plan our day and use this technique called time boxing. Now, time boxing has been around for a long time. It uses a technique called making an implementation intention, which has been studied in thousands of different studies. It's been replicated over and over again in the psychology community. It's an amazingly simple tactic, which is just planning out what you want to do and when you want to do it. It's as simple as that. And this technique has been shown to be highly, highly effective. Now, that's been around for a long time. What I free. You don't even have to give me your email address. Anybody can use it anytime. It's at nirandfar.com/schedule-maker. nirandfar.com/schedule-maker. And what you want to do is basically sit down with your week ahead, okay? And for that week ahead, if that sounds too onerous to you, just take the next day, okay? How about tomorrow? Instead of doing these hokey vision boards and 5-year plans and regrets of the dying, let's just start with tomorrow, okay? And I want you to ask yourself, how can you turn your values into time? Okay, how can you turn your values into time? What are values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become.
Right.
Values are attributes of the person you want to become. So what I want you to do is to ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend their time in these 3 life domains I'm going to describe to you? The first life domain is you. Think of 3 concentric circles. In the center is you. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people.
Right.
So how would the person you want to become spend their day taking care of themselves? Meaning, is time spent on exercise part of your values? I'm not saying it has to be, okay? I'm not going to tell you what your values should be. Nobody should tell you what your values should be. You should decide for yourself, but turn those values into time. So if physical health is important to you, is physical health important to you? Do you have time in your schedule to exercise? Do you have time in your schedule for a bedtime, right? How many of us are parents and we tell our kids, you got to have a bedtime, get to bed, but we're hypocrites. We don't have bedtimes ourselves, right? Why would we be hypocrites for our kids and not follow our own rules? We know that proper rest is absolutely essential. This is not news. Everybody knows you got to get, proper rest for physiological and psychological health. So do you have that time scheduled in your day? Do you have time for meditation or prayer, whatever it is that's important to you? Is that time scheduled? Including, to answer your question, time for video games. If you like playing video games, do it, right? But do it without guilt. The irony is, so many of us, we want to watch some Netflix. We want to just chill out. We want to play video games, but we feel guilty about it because we're not being productive. And I argue, if you schedule the video game, if you schedule time for Instagram or whatever you want to do to play or just invest time in having fun, is great. as long as you plan time for it. So it's not a distraction, it's traction. The time you plan to waste is not wasted time. And don't let anybody tell you that somehow playing video games is morally inferior to what they do with their time. If you want to knit, if you want to paint, whatever you want to do it, but plan for it. Don't do it whenever you are trying to escape these internal triggers. Make time for whatever task is important to you to help you be the person, have the values of the person you want to become, okay? And that's not a distraction. Maybe that's a diversion, right? A diversion of attention is when we simply shift our attention from one thing to another. Diversions are great. Distractions are not. Distractions are always bad because by definition, distractions are the opposite of traction. Distractions are things that pull you away from doing the things you plan to do. Okay, so that's the first domain, you. Now you've got the next circle, your relationships. Okay, and this is incredibly important now during this time of social isolation or social distancing, which involves a lot of isolation. What we are finding is that people who don't plan regular time with important others, with their important relationships, are really suffering right now. And for the first, week or two, people were like, okay, I guess I'll sit around the house and, maybe I'll call up my friends once in a while. And now this is starting to really kick in. It's starting to hurt a lot of people here. We're starting to feel this loneliness. And the antidote for that loneliness is to schedule that time with the important relationships in your life. If you live with a significant other, do you have time for lunch, dinner, interactions together on your calendar so that, they can do their thing for a while, you can do your thing for a while, but we're going to meet up together and have meals together, for instance. That's an example. Do you have time to call your parents, your siblings, your best friends on the calendar? If you have kids at home, please schedule online play dates for them. Schedule time for them to go on Zoom or FaceTime or even play Fortnite with their friends, but make it a regular interaction. So you don't have to constantly say, well, how about Tuesday at 3? No, well, how about Thursday at 4? Just say, look, every week at this day and time, we're gonna hang out, okay? And it's gonna be virtual for now, but in the future, when we start meeting up together, keep that practice, have that regular bowling night, the church group, whatever it is that regularly gets you to interact with your friends and important others, okay? So that's relationships. And then finally, the work domain. So when you look at that calendar, you're going to have a lot of time left over probably, and you have to fit in time for work. What I want you to do as you fill up that calendar is to ask yourself to bucket your work into two types of work, okay? We have what we call reactive work, and we have what's called reflective work. Reactive work is responding to things, the emails, the phone calls, the text messages, the Slack notifications. That's reactive work. And if you're not careful, the reactive work will crowd out everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And so what you have to do is to make sure you book time for the reflective work. And let me let you in on a little secret. People hire me for consulting, okay? And they pay me thousands of dollars an hour to help teach them how to be indistractable. And let me tell you a little secret. 90% of the time during these phone calls, I don't talk. I don't say anything. I listen to them work out their own problems and figure out their solutions for themselves. Well, let me tell you something. Anyone can do this. If you want the competitive advantage of the century, make time to freaking think. Ooh. Nobody plans time to think in their day. Well, I do this through writing. If I have some time, I can write some stuff. I can think through what I'm working on right now and what problems I'm having in my life. And I like to write through my problems. But you can do this by any number of ways, but make sure you have that time in your day to strategize, to plan, to think, as opposed to what most people are doing right now. Most people are just ruminating, right? They're consuming news all day long as if they're going to find the magic solution to their problems, as opposed to plan that time in your day to just be with yourself and think through your thoughts, your issues, your plans, your strategies for the future. So make sure you have that time in your schedule for reflective as well as reactive work. And now what's going to happen, you're going to have an artifact, okay? You're going to have a schedule that now, for the first time for many people in their lives, they will know the difference between traction, anything that's on their calendar, and everything else is a distraction. And so now that physical artifact can be shared with people. So you can sit down with your significant other, your husband, your wife, and you can say, look, here's my schedule. In my family, my wife and I would fight for years. We had these stupid arguments about, Oh, who's taking out the trash and who's going to feed our daughter and who's doing the grocery shopping, all this stuff. We never have those fights anymore because we do a schedule sync, what I call a schedule sync every week. And we look at each other's calendars. It takes 10 minutes with your boss. This will change your life. You sit down with your boss, okay? Once a week, 15 minutes. You show them your weekly schedule. They will worship the ground you walk on. Why? Because bosses are desperate to know what the heck you're doing all day. They want to know what you're up to, but they don't want to ask you to do this because they feel like you're asking, to micromanage you. But if you proactively say, hey, look, boss, here's my schedule for the week ahead, okay? Here's how I'm going to spend my time this week. Now, you see this other list over here? I wrote on this piece of paper all the stuff I won't have time for because, you see my calendar. You see how I'm spending my time. Can you help me reprioritize? Why is this so revolutionary? Why does this work so well? Because we've all heard this stupid advice that everybody says that if you want to have more focus in your life, you have to learn how to say no. What kind of stupid advice is that? You're going to tell your boss, the person who cuts your checks, no? You're going to get fired. Are you kidding me? That's stupid advice. Don't be the person who says no to their boss and gets fired. Be the person who lets their boss say no. So when you take that calendar to them and you say, here's what I'm working on, right? And then they say, oh, you know what? That thing on that on that piece of paper, that's actually way more important. Can you flip-flop 4 o'clock Wednesday with this task instead of that task? No problem, boss. That sounds great, right? And if you're a manager, I know a lot of your audience are entrepreneurs. Have your team read Indistractable and they'll learn exactly how to do it. So you don't have to convince them to do this. It's not going to be you saying use this practice. Let me do that. I've spent 5 years researching this stuff and the book is pretty convincing and I hope they'll adopt this practice as well.
Nir, how does this carry over to relationships?
Yeah. Oh, totally. So
I was going to say, I resonate very highly with you and how you go about scheduling out your day because you're scheduling out your life. We talk about lifestyle design. I want to be productive with self-love. I want to be productive with fulfillment. But Alan and I are both in amazing relationships, and we have these systems in place. What do you have for systems for yours?
Yeah, no, this is great. So the book is actually separated into 2 big sections. One is going over these 4 steps that we talked about earlier. So things you can do for yourself to become indistractable. And then the second half of the book is about interactions with other people. So how do we raise indistractable kids? If you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. It's only going to become more potentially distracting. So the world that our kids will inhabit, we have to teach them how to become indistractable. The skill is essential for them. Then there's a section on how to build indistractable workplaces, right? Because workplaces can be a hotbed of distraction. So it tells you if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a manager, even if you're not, how you can influence your company to become indistractable. And then finally, indistractable relationships. So how do we have these kind of interactions with our friends, with our family members, so that we can be indistractable in those relationships? And so let's dive into this category. Are you talking about your relationship with your significant other or your friends? What kind of relationship?
I would say significant other.
Yeah. Okay, great. Is there something in particular that's on your mind that you find relates to distraction with your significant other?
Not with me particularly, because again, I'm very focused on making sure I'm growing everything. But I know with a lot of people, this is what happens when they're talking. You and I would be on this interview and I'd be looking over here and just I know obviously cell phones can be a big thing, right? But just in general, what have you experienced from helping others, and maybe what are the big leverage points that really help you in your relationship?
Yeah, sure. Oh man, there's so much. So there's no area of my life that has not improved since I became indistractable. And just to remind everybody, I was patient zero here. I wrote this book for me because I was struggling with distraction. That's why the book took me 5 years. I kept getting distracted for the first 3 years until I figured out which techniques actually work. And so it took me a long time to figure out these techniques. But once I discovered them and started utilizing them, I could actually put them to good use. And then I became, much more fulfilled in my professional relationship, in my relationship with my wife. So let me give you, I'm trying to think which examples are the best examples to bring up. Let me give you one that I think is particularly pertinent. So for many years, my wife and I noticed that we weren't getting to bed on time. We weren't getting to sleep on time. And basically, I'll be honest with you, our sex life suffered. We've been married for 18 years. And night after night, we would go to bed and I would caress my cell phone and she would be fondling her iPad, and we weren't going to bed. We didn't have time to be intimate until, we would take our devices to bed, and then we'd just conk out, and our sex life suffered because of it. And so once I started down this line of research and I discovered some of these techniques, we implemented a tactic that's in the fourth strategy, preventing distraction with pacts. Here's what we did. We used what's called an effort pact to make it more difficult, to add friction between us and the behavior we didn't want to do. Okay. So first, we set that bedtime. We said, okay, 10 o'clock is when we want to be in bed. And then we went to the hardware store and we bought ourselves this $5 outlet timer. Now this outlet timer, anything you plug into it will turn off at a certain time of day or night, whatever you set it to. So in our household, every night at 10 p.m., the internet shuts off. Okay. Every night, automatically. Now, today you can actually get internet routers that have this functionality built in so that it only turns off some devices and not others, which is amazing. But at the time when we started using it, that wasn't available. So we actually got this physical timer. Now, could I unplug it? Of course, I could go underneath my desk and I could unplug it and replug it in, but that would take effort, right? That would take work for me to do that. So it gives me that moment of, wait a minute, is this really what I want to do? Do I really need to keep scrolling? Do I really need to keep checking email? Or do I actually want to go spend some time with my wife right now and go to bed when I said I would? And so that would be an example of a very simple tactic that's called making an effort pact. And of course, there's all kinds of other effort pacts we can make, but that's one way that we can use it in a relationship.
Fire. This is such a powerful episode.
Yeah, this is blowing me away. I love it.
It's the tip of the iceberg. I'm struggling because there's so many stories like this. There's so many techniques. There's hundreds of different techniques you can use. I'll tell you another one real quick, actually. So when it comes with relationships, how many of us, we go to lunch with our friends and we're sitting around the table and the person across from us is checking their phone and, looking at Facebook or whatever. And that's super annoying. And so most people are realizing that that's rude. The good news is that we are spreading social antibodies, what we call them, that, people are learning that these kind of behaviors are not healthy for society. Right. And most people are learning to put it away. But what do you do with that schmuck that at the table is still using their phone? You can't say, hey, buddy, stop using your phone. They're not going to be your friend very long. Alan, stop it. You can't you can't say that. They're not going to be your friend very long. So what do you do instead? So there's a wonderful question you can ask that gets people back in the conversation. Here's what you do. Let's say Alan's using his phone.
Let's say.
And so what you say, you don't say, Alan, stop using your phone, because let's be honest, you don't know if there's some emergency on the other side of that screen. Maybe, his kid's sick, or maybe there's some emergency at work that he needs to respond to. You don't know what's on the other side of that screen. So what you want to do is to ask a simple question. And that question is, hey, Alan, I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay? You see what I did there? I'm just saying, is everything okay? So if there really is a problem, if there's an emergency, Alan can say, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm really sorry. My kid's sick. I got to go take care of this. And they'll hopefully excuse themselves from the table and take care of it.
Right.
9 times out of 10, you'll snap them out of that phone zone they're in. And they'll say, oh, I'm sorry. Let me put it away. And they realize what you're implying, that you'd like them to be back part of the conversation.
The phone zone. That's absolute fire. So you've probably read a book called Flow at some point.
Yeah. Csikszentmihalyi.
Right. So she talks about, my apologies. He talks about the amount of times we spend in flow creates a lot of the biochemicals in our body that produce happiness and fulfillment. So what are your techniques? Obviously, time boxing your calendar and things like that. What do you suggest to our listeners to design their days around states of flow, even if it is to play video games or whatever?
You're putting me in a spot.
Okay. Good.
I think flow is funky.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why I think flow is funky. Because if you're doing something that puts you in flow, you don't need that advice, right? Like the case studies that Csikszentmihalyi has are the NBA player that's in flow as he's playing, a game, or the surfer who's on the surfboard and is in the state of flow. He doesn't talk about how you get in flow when you're doing your taxes, right? How do you get into flow when you're doing something that's really sucks, right? If something is, I'll totally get into flow when I'm surfing, because surfing's awesome. How do I get into flow when I'm doing something really hard?
That's the question.
Not fun.
Yes, that's the question. How do I get
into it?
Okay, so can you?
There's no answer to that, right? Csikszentmihalyi doesn't tell you how to do it.
Right.
And I think that's the big problem. That's why I say flow is funky, because I think it gives people this false impression. So he tells you basically, like, it's nice if you can get it, so try and get it. That's basically the advice. I'll give you the summary. It's not bad research. It's fascinating. I think what it tells us is, if there's something that brings you flow, try and do more of it. That's awesome advice. Definitely.
Okay.
Got
Right.
it. We'll try.
Right.
What I was frustrated with was, like, those are not the things that are distracting. If you're in flow, you're not distracted. You're in flow. There's no problem. You're loving what you're doing. There's no internal trigger. So you're not seeking escape. The opposite.
Because
You
you're
want
not
to stay in
uncomfortable.
flow.
Right.
You're not
Okay.
uncomfortable.
Right.
So distraction only occurs when you're uncomfortable. You're doing your taxes. You're doing that stupid report. You're doing the presentation that you really have been dreading. That's why you procrastinate, because of these uncomfortable emotional states that you're looking to escape with procrastination and distraction.
Okay.
So instead of flow, what I recommend, and the problem, I don't want to rag on flow too long, but the problem is, I think, that when people think that they can make any task into flow, by the way, the same problem with habits. Right now, people are so habit crazy, and they're really hurting themselves, because what people don't understand about habits and flow is that not every behavior can become a habit. So people say, I want to get into the writing habit. What they're really saying is, I want to make a hard thing easy. I got news for you, folks. It never gets easy. I've written 2 books, hundreds, maybe thousands of blog posts. It's never easy. It's always hard, because writing will never be a habit. What's the definition of a habit? The definition of a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. Who writes with little or no conscious thought? Writing is hard work if you want to write anything good, right? The same when it comes to going to the gym. By definition, if you're just doing something with little or no conscious thought, you're not going to grow. Growth only happens when you're doing something hard.
That was excellent bench press form, by the way.
You like that? I'll do shoulder presses now. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But you don't get stronger unless you push yourself. If you do the same thing every day, maybe you can get into flow because your mind is elsewhere. Cool, right? So for some people, running can do that, right? Because, it's just steady state. They're not pushing themselves. But let me tell you, if you're pushing yourself to make that time, to get stronger, to get healthier, you're going to feel it. It's going to hurt.
Right.
So the problem with flow and habits is that people think anything can be a habit, and it can't, right? Writing is not going to be a habit. Pushing yourself to be better physically, that's not going to be a habit, because it requires the opposite of a habit. It requires a lot of conscious thought. So, okay, Nir, stop, drilling into the semantics, whatever. They're just words. It's not just words. The reason this matters is because when people think, oh, I can make anything into a habit, and then suddenly it'll be easy, and then they realize they've been doing something for 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, and it's still hard, they quit. Because they think, well, there must be something wrong with me. I did everything the experts told me, and I'm not in flow. This isn't a habit. It's still hard. Right? So that's where it backfires. And they didn't do anything wrong. They just had the wrong expectation. So what we need to tell people is that some behaviors can become habits. Some behaviors are going to be routines. A routine is a behavior frequently repeated. So that's fine. Right. So how do we make these routines something that we can do without distraction? So here's the idea. There's 3 central ways to master internal triggers: reimagining the trigger, reimagining the task, and reimagining our temperament. And let me talk about that second technique around reimagining the task. It turns out that we can learn how to make any task into play. Okay, and this comes from the research of Ian Bogos. I can't take credit for it. He says he has this wonderful book called Play Anything. And he talks about how you can turn any task into play. Now, he says something very controversial. He says that for something to be play, it doesn't have to be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be fun. It can still be play without it being fun. I mean, you think about how when somebody is doing Sudoku or a really hard crossword puzzle, or even when somebody is watching sports, they're in pain sometimes. It's really hard. I don't know if you would call it fun or enjoyable, but it captures your attention. What's that?
Like working out, weight training.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It captures your attention. And so that's the important part. So what he says is that there are 2 attributes of play, and neither of those require to be fun or enjoyable. They just have to capture your attention. And the 2 tactics are to focus more intensely on the task, okay, to understand it more fully, and 2, to look for the variability in the task. And so this sounds crazy for a lot of tasks, but it turns out that people who can do that can make all sorts of things into play. Think about the coffee obsessed barista, right? Do you have any friends who are just crazy about coffee? You know, I don't give a shit about coffee. And like, if you told me make some coffee, I'd be like, why? Are you going to pay me? Like, am I getting a job at Starbucks here? But some people love it. Why? Because they know everything about the beans and the roast. And if you do it 3 minutes versus 4 minutes of soak time, it's going to taste this way. And this is Arabica. They get more intensely in the task, and they look for the variability. Think about your motorhead friend, right? The person who's all into fixing cars. Like, I wouldn't do that. You have to pay me to be a mechanic, but they love it because they look more deeply into it. And they look for the variability. Same goes for crochet. Same goes, believe it or not, for taxes, for all kinds of things. That's how we learn to play anything. And so I tell you exactly how to do that in the book. So it's not about flow, it's about play.
My goodness.
Fire.
All right, we got 5 minutes left. I want to make sure, we usually have 2 questions that we ask, but I want to make sure you get a chance to plug everything and anything you have going on. This has been, you're blowing us away. You're blowing us away.
Oh, my pleasure. I always feel like we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. So I'm happy to come back and talk more. Sorry,
sure.
I would have loved to share everything I know.
No, we'll definitely 100% do it again. We've had many people on multiple times, and you're definitely one we'd like to add to
Without a question.
Where can people find you? Where can they buy both of your books? Where can they learn more about you? You have the best website name ever, so I'll let you plug away.
Thank you. Yeah, so my website is nirandfar.com, but Nir is spelled like my first name, so that's Nir and far.com, nirandfar.com. And if you want more information about my book, Indistractable, it's called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. It's available wherever books are sold. But I want to give you a special thing for your listeners. On my website, if you get the book, make sure you keep your order number, whether you get it on Audible or print edition or ebook, doesn't matter. If you buy it offline on Amazon, doesn't matter. Keep your order number. Go to indistractable.com. There's a complimentary video course, as well as a bunch of tools and resources that you can get. All are complimentary. You don't have to, it doesn't cost anything more than just the price of the book. Make sure you keep your order number and enter it at indistractable.com. It's spelled I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E, indistractable.com.
My goodness. It is a fire book. I've been listening to it for a little bit now, and it's one of the, I almost had trouble coming up with questions to ask you because so many of the thoughts are they're foreign, but they make so much sense. So when I was going through the questions, I was like, hopefully Nir will just go off like you did and make it a fire interview, because usually I have a lot more in-depth questions. But it is an amazing book, and you are an amazing human. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. This was one of my favorites for sure.
I appreciate it. You're too kind. This was a real pleasure. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks for reading the book, and stay strong and stay indistractable.
Absolutely.
Nir, thank you so much for coming on the show. This, honestly, I believe is my favorite episode so far, but that's also because not only did you do a great job, but I am obsessed with lifestyle design. So this lights my fire. Awesome.
Or you just have a very low bar. That could also be part of it.
Well, I hope that's not the case.
I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely.
Nir Eyal, thank you so much, Nir.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.